Well, greetings once again, Culture Bugs. Today's installment of a glossing of Mrs. Dalloway is going to take us from page 172 to about 183 or so. So this will be the penultimate recording on this particular novel. So let's look at the bottom of page 172 for a nice example of onomatopoeia. This is Peter speaking. He looked always as if he were on duty, thought Peter, a privileged but secretive being, hoarding secrets which he would die to defend, though it was only some little piece of tittle-tattle, dropped by a court footman, which would be in all the papers tomorrow. So, of course, he's talking about Hugh Whitbread, right? So tittle-tattle then is just some gossip and highly onomatopoeic. So I just might ask a question like, to whom is Peter referring? I might even ask just who's the speaker of this particular passage. So make a little note about that. Okay, and then oh look, here with the further onomatopoeic expressions of gossip and whatnot. Where Peter says, and had thank God he was out of that pernicious hubble-bubble, if it were only to hear baboons chatter and coolies beat their wives. So coolies being a pejorative term for natives of India. I might ask you a question about that. Let's see. So here's a nice nice characterization of Peter and Hugh then. So this is Peter observing there at the party. An olive-skinned youth from one of the universities stood obsequiously by. So we know obsequiously means, in sort of a servile underling type role. Okay, him he would patronize, initiate, teach how to get on. So a nice example of asyndeton. For he liked nothing better than doing kindnesses, making the hearts of old ladies palpitate with the joy of being thought of in their age, their affliction, thinking themselves quite forgotten. Yet here was dear Hugh, driving up and spending an hour talking of the past, remembering trifles, praising the homemade cake, though Hugh might eat cake with a duchess any day of his life, and, to look at him, probably did spend a good deal of time in that agreeable occupation. So that's a marvelous example of sort of snarky thing that Peter Walsh would notice, which is to say that Hugh is fat because he eats a lot of cake. So it characterizes Hugh as being sort of this, this guy that would go visit old ladies. And Peter, who continues to express his jealousy at the fact that Hugh Whitbread has got this job that Peter would love to have. It just speaks to how petty Peter Walsh is, and this sort of thing. Okay, let's see. So here we are. I'm just going to push into this next business. Here we go. This is so good. All right, so Prime Minister has arrived, as you may recall, and yet the poor Prime Minister, he is just described as being, not an extraordinary guy in terms of his personal appeal, sense of things. He does not cut a dashing figure, does not cut an authoritative figure. He just looks like any other kind of dude walking down the street. So, if you're talking about a thematic concern from the novel, it can't escape your attention that appearance versus reality would be one of those. And here's an example made manifest in the fact that the Prime Minister at the time just looks like any ordinary schmo on the street. And now this is at the top of page 174. And now Clarissa escorted her Prime Minister down the room, prancing, sparkling with the stateliness of her gray hair. She wore earrings and a silver-green mermaid's dress. Lolloping on the waves and braiding her tresses, she seemed, having that gift still, to be, to exist, to sum it all up in the moment as she passed, turned, caught her scarf in some other woman's dress, unhitched it, laughed, all with the most perfect ease and air of a creature floating in its element. but age had brushed her, even as a mermaid might behold in her glass the setting sun on some very clear evening over the waves. There was a breath of tenderness. Her severity, her prudery, her woodenness were all warmed through now, and she had about her, as she said goodbye to the thick, gold-laced man who was doing his best, and good luck to him, to look important, an inexpressible dignity, an exquisite cordiality, as if she wished the whole world well, and must now, being on the very verge and rim of things, take her leave. So she made him think. But he was not in love. Listen, I get that a lot of the things that I say to you are falling on deaf ears, but let's just pretend for the sake of argument that one of you, years from now, remembers this, years and years from now, where the old bald-headed guy says, look at what an absolute wonder this sentence is. This, I would say this whole, let's just call it this paragraph. Okay, that paragraph. What a wonder. As it is expressive of a man who is observing and describing the actions of, let's be real, his beloved. Of course he's still in love with her. An idiot. And then Clarissa is compared to what? A mermaid, a mystical being. Okay, a figment of one's imagination, an attempt to explain the inexplicable. If you want to talk about a paragraph maybe that explains Peter's sense of who Clarissa is, it might be this, because it just is emblematic of the way he feels about her. She is not a real woman in his mind. Okay, Richard Dalloway probably treats her in a way that is far from idolatrous or or as a goddess or anything like that. I think he condescends toward her. Dismisses her fears as being silly or ridiculous or what have you, because Richard is a pragmatist. He's a realist, and Peter is not. And so, yeah, the two of them, Peter and Clarissa together, would likely have been problematic because they're both idealists. This is what they argued about all the time, was their sense of idealism. But it's just, I would ask you, what work that we have read recently features mermaids? I'm going to ask you that on the quiz. And your answer, of course, is going to be the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Woolf was familiar with the poem. There are little whiffs of it that make an appearance here. But this is the sentence that, there was a breath of tenderness. Her severity, her prudery, her woodenness were all warmed through now, and she had about her as she said goodbye to the thick gold-laced man, the Prime Minister, who was doing his best, and good luck to him, to look important, an inexpressible dignity, an exquisite cordiality, as if she wished the whole world well, and must now, being on the very verge and rim of things, take her leave. So she made him think, and the person that she made it think, you could interpret that probably two ways, and maybe Woolf wants you to interpret it two ways. Who is the he? So she made him think. The Prime Minister or Peter? It works both ways. So again, the mastery of Virginia Woolf. Okay. More delightful characterization of human beings and human behavior is going to be here. This is Elizabeth Suddenly, bottom of page 174, where she's thinking of the picture of the little girl with a muff brought back Kilman with a rush. Kilman, her enemy. That was satisfying. That was real. Ah, how she hated her. Hot, hypocritical, corrupt, with all that power. Isn't that a marvelously ironic observation. Kilman with all that power. Elizabeth's seducer, the woman who had crept in to steal and defile. Richard would say, what nonsense. She hated her. She loved her. Now, if you're unable to identify that as being a paradox, I don't know what to tell you. I'm probably going to make that worth a bunch of points. And I'm writing over here in the margin, Q, for something I'm probably going to ask you about. Notice here that you've got how she hated her, hot, hypocritical, corrupt. Ascendedon is that rapid tempo that's created here. Okay, and again, the amazing paradox and so emblematic of human nature, the love-hate. Okay, again, opposite of love is not hate, but it is indifference. Okay, I'm going to push you down to the bottom of page 175, and again, I hope that you are actually reading the novel so that you get the Who Shot John questions that I'm asking on the quiz. A lot of you are missing them. Is this? Let's see. Here we go. And up came that wandering will-o'-the-wisp, that vagueless phosphorescence, old Mrs. Hilbery, stretching her hands to the blaze of his laughter about the Duke and the lady. Nice implied metaphor there, right? The blaze of his laughter. So we want to be near people. We warm to people who make us laugh, who are happy, who are joyous. Which, as she heard it across the room, seemed to reassure her on a point which sometimes bothered her if she woke early in the morning and did not like to call her maid for a cup of tea. How it is certain we must die. I mean, this may very well be, you could argue for it being the central impulse of the novel. It is the thing around which everyone is tippy-toeing, or they are tiptoeing up to it, like the edge of a cliff, a verge over which they are afraid to look and yet feel unavoidably drawn to look. There's so much, as we're going to see when news of Septimus' death crashes the party, that you can look at all the characters and say, to what extent are all of them in this sort of implied or explicit reverie about the past and about how it is that the past is affecting them. Am I going to, what's my legacy going to be? In a lot of ways, this is a legacy novel. That how is Peter Walsh going to be remembered by other people? Well, we know how he's going to be remembered by Lady Bruton and Hugh Whitbread and Richard Dalloway as this sort of flawed individual who couldn't keep from being from falling in love with women he didn't need to be falling in love with, for getting into some kind of scrape or other. But how's Sally Seton going to remember him? And how does he want to be remembered himself? And so again, if you want to take away a lesson from the novel, is ask yourself, right now at this point in my life, 17, 18 years old, what have you, what legacy am I leaving behind? And is it too late to change that as I move forward? And I would argue that no, it's not too late to change that. Okay. Let's see. I was going to look at this at the craft of this sentence, but it's similar to the one that I read you a minute ago about Clarissa through the eyes of Peter. So I'm going to go ahead and skip through it. If you want to examine it on your own, that's fine. One thing just quickly to notice here, bottom of page 176. But the noise, she said, the noise. That would be an example of epimony, because the noise is what would be repeated if you were hearing the words spoken. So we can ignore the she said portion that the narrator ends up including. Okay. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry, I can't help but look at this marvelous passage as well. But she must speak to that couple, said Clarissa, Lord Gayton and Nancy Blow. Not that they added perceptibly to the noise of the party. They were not talking perceptibly. As they stood side by the yellow curtains, they would soon be off elsewhere, together, and never had very much to say in any circumstances. They looked, that was enough. They looked so clean, so sound. She with an apricot bloom of powder and paint, but he scrubbed, rinsed, with the eyes of a bird, so that no ball could pass him or stroke surprise him. He struck, he leapt, accurately, on the spot. Ponies' mouths quivered at the end of his reins. He had his honors, ancestral monuments, banners hanging in the church at home. He had his duties, his tenants, a mother and sisters, had been all day at Lord's, and that was what they were talking about, cricket, cousins, the movies, when Mrs. Dalloway came up. Lord Gayton liked her most awfully. So did Miss Blow. She had such charming manners. So this, when you look at all the examples so here's a syndeton here. You've got it. I mean, it's just all over the place. And so you see that the relative pace of the passage is quick. It's supposed to be. It is supposed to reflect, so my note to self here is that the frenetic rapidity of the structure, the zipping between and among details, mirrors the way that we observe others, mirrors the way that we judge others on just snap, 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 snap. Okay? That was epizeuxis that I just used there. Let's see. Another example of how writing choices communicate a sense of action of the mind. So here's Clarissa. She's looking around. She is just desperately concerned that her party is not going to be, quote unquote, a success. And it keeps saying, oh, gee, what can I do to make it better? And so forth. What a pity, she said. I had hoped to have dancing. It was so extraordinarily nice of them to have come. But talk of dancing, the rooms were packed. Again, it not only says something about Clarissa, but about other people's minds. The person who is just so wound up about, Jesus' date going well, or is my party going well, or is my job interview going well, or whatever happens to be. And so your mind is just racing around as you stumble with the uncertainties and so forth. Okay, now let's push down to maybe my favorite passage because of what its ambitions are, I think, what it accomplishes in terms of trying to capture a sense of the. So we talked at the beginning of of our discussion of this novel about the fact that Virginia Woolf is including, at the party in particular, but in the novel generally, a broad cross-section of English society, maybe human, of human culture generally. It may not necessarily be English, but there's such a disconnect between the things that we think about each other. And those of you that have older relatives, maybe grandma, grandpa, that you see on a routine basis and so forth, and the things that you think interest them and whatever, and the things that maybe your parents think about their parents and so forth, you can see the disconnect that your parents have with respect to the things they believe about their own parents. And so I ask you then to look at yourselves and say, gee, to what extent am I, how's my behavior toward my parents like what I see from my parents toward theirs? And you're going to see similarities. So here's this this tremendous passage here about Miss Helena Perry, who, Peter and other people thought was dead. So this is Clarissa's aunt. Where had Peter got to? They used to be such friends. That's she and old Miss Perry. For at the mention of India or even Ceylon, her eyes, only one was glass, slowly deepened, became blue, beheld not human beings. Look at all those bees. She had no tender memories, no proud illusions about viceroys, generals, mutinies. It was orchids she saw, and mountain passes, and herself carried on the backs of coolies in the 60s over solitary peaks, or descending to uproot orchids, startling blossoms never beheld before, which she painted in watercolor, an indomitable Englishwoman, fretful if disturbed by the war, say, which dropped a bomb at her very door, from her deep meditation over orchids and her own figure journeying in the 60s in India. But here was Peter. And so what I love about the passage is it is a microcosm for the tendency of memory, the power of memory. We remember the tiniest details and attach such meaning, hopes, joy, despair to them. I would submit that the things in your life that you will most remember are little things, not big, kind of capital letter type things, capital letter events. It's little things. Okay, and so this is what that passage right there is, I think, designed to communicate. All right, let's see. All right, let's do this. We're gonna push to. There's this marvelous comparison, an implied comparison between Lady Bruton and Miss Perry. I mean, they're both sort of these stately, matronly type women. Lady Bruton is not nearly as old as old Miss Perry. She's in her 80s. But I would suggest that here we are with old ladies telling it like it is. And Lady Bruton, of course, tells it like it is, and so does old Miss Perry. At least she's thinking it like it is. So here's old Lady Bruton, and she's trying to. She feels it impressive that she's been talking to the Prime Minister, and as we know, she dragged him into a side room so that they could, hold forth. And so here we go. Everybody believes that old Miss Perry just wants to talk about, Ceylon and the old days and this kind of thing, and it's clear that she, really doesn't. The Prime Minister had just been telling her, old Miss Perry, huddled up in her shawl, did not care what the Prime Minister had just been telling her, and Lady Bruton would like to have Peter Walsh's opinion, he being fresh from the centre, that's India, and she would get Sir Sampson to meet him, for really it prevented her from sleeping at night, the folly of it, the wickedness, she might say, being a soldier's daughter. She was an old woman now, not good for much, but her house, her servants, her good friend Millie Brush, did he remember her? Were all there only asking to be used if they could be of help, in short. For she never spoke of England, but this Isle of Men, this dear, dear land was in her blood without reading Shakespeare. I'm going to stop right there and tell you that we're aware that that Virginia Woolf has referred to Shakespeare on a number of different occasions. We have the fear not business from Cymbeline. Well, this cluster here is from the Shakespeare's history play Richard II, and this is Act 2, Scene 1. The lines spoken by John of Gaunt. I'm going to read them for you. They're among the most famous lines that Shakespeare wrote. These are definitely among the most quoted from this particular play. So there's John of Gaunt. He's talking to the king. This royal throne of kings, this sceptred isle, this earth of majesty, this seat of Mars, this other Eden, demi-paradise, this fortress built by nature for herself against infection and the hand of war, this happy breed of men, this little world, this precious stone set in the silver sea which serves it in the office of a wall, or as a moat defensive to a house, against the envy of less happier lands, this blessed plot, this earth, this realm, this England. Fantastic. So, probably going to ask you a question about that. What is that an allusion? All right. Let's see. This is a good example of, I asked you the question about who is Lady Rossiter. Sally Seton, right? With 5 enormous boys. Here's a good example of ekphonesis. You'll recall that you were first introduced to that when we were reading the poetry of Gerard Manley Hopkins. So ekphonesis, rhetorical figure of pathos. It's an emotional exclamation. And this is Sally referring to Clarissa. And Clarissa, Sally caught her by the arm. Clarissa stopped beside them. But I can't stay, she said. I shall come later. Wait, she said, looking at Peter and Sally. They must wait, she meant, until all these people had gone. So that scene right there creates narrative tension. We are then awaiting the time later in the novel. When is it going to happen? when the three of them, these three old friends, will actually get together and have a conversation where they'll be able to do what? Reminisce, catch up. How are they going to do it? Okay, this is a nice example of synesthesia here. But her voice was wrung of its old ravishing richness. You hear that? All those R's. Wrung, ravishing richness. I'd ask a question about that. Her eyes not aglow as they used to be when she smoked cigars, when she ran down the passage to fetch her sponge bath without a stitch of clothing on. And Ellen Atkins asked, what if the gentleman had met her? But everybody forgave her. So you've got the, if you're taking a look at her voice was wrung of its old ravishing richness, then the tenor, of course, is going to be Sally's voice. The vehicle is a wet garment or towel, because if you wring something, that means that you are twisting it in order to get the excess moisture out, right? Let's see. Oh, how about this one? A mystery is solved. That has to do with the admirable Hugh and an encounter in the smoking room. She accused Hugh Whitbread, of all people, and there he was, her old friend Hugh, talking to the Portuguese ambassador, of kissing her in the smoking room to punish her for saying that women should have votes. Vulgar men did, she said. Okay, so this is the confirmation we have that Hugh, as she tells Peter, actually did kiss her on the mouth. That rascal. All right, let's see. So top of page 182, as we're glossing. Nice example of, and this is the description of Sally, and it's a continuation of what happened at the bottom of page 181. And Clarissa remembered having to persuade her not to denounce him, that's Hugh, at family prayers, that's nice irony, which she was capable of doing with her daring, her recklessness, her melodramatic love of being the center of everything and creating scenes, and it was bound, Clarissa used to think, to end in some awful tragedy, her death, her martyrdom, instead of which she had married quite unexpectedly a bald man with a large buttonhole who owned it. It was said, cotton mills at Manchester, and she had 5 boys. So that anaphora is for vehemence, okay? And then look how surprising this bit here, and in some awful tragedy, her death, her martyrdom. What does it take for someone to be martyred? Okay, it means they have died in the cause of something. What in the world could Sally have died in the cause of that would allow her to be martyred? Let's see. Okay. Oof. Oh, here we go. Notice that Sir William Bradshaw made an appearance, and he gives the willies to people other than just Lucrezia and Septimus Smith. Rest in peace. This is Clarissa's impression of him. He looked what he was, a great doctor, a man absolutely at the head of his profession, very powerful, rather worn. For think what cases came before him, people in the uttermost depths of misery, people on the verge of insanity, husbands and wives. He had to decide questions of appalling difficulty. Yet, what she felt was, one wouldn't like Sir William to see one unhappy. No, not that man. So the elliptical sentence there, again, the rhetorical name is ellipsis, is used to convey the simple, unvarnished belief. It's the quick, like, chill that you get at, ooh, no. Not him. Don't want him to see me unhappy. He'll send me to one of his homes. Okay. And then I'm going to end with a little cliffhanger here. Because, of course, it's Sir William, actually I think it might be Sir William's wife, who brings in the news that one of Sir William's patients has killed himself. And so here, he had been in the army. Oh, thought Clarissa, in the middle of my party, here's death, she thought. All right, so I'm going to end there, pick up in a minute.